Hey everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dean Allman, and I've been a photographer now pretty much since I was 14 years old. Now that I'm more in the retired space, that's how I like to describe it, the retired space. I pretty much do photography and videography full time. My background is that I have a master's in social work, and I practiced as a clinical social worker for 20 years in the first part of my career. And then I moved into technology. I was picking up websites on the side and learning how to use the computers and make it all work for me and my job. And then as time rolled along, I gradually hit a point where I had put in 20 years and I was ready to make a transition. So I did technology work for several years. And that was a huge boon to me, really helpful when I decided I really wanted to get into photography and videography. It was interesting too. One of the days before Christmas this year, we had a party and I met a fellow who was a retired commander of a police force here in Denver. And we started chatting about the effects that intense kind of work like that has on people that are there. And he described talking with a psychologist at one point who recommended that police officers try and find a way to experience real good things in their life because they have to deal with severe traumas all the time. And if you can find good things in life, then that helps to balance somewhat all of the overstimulation you get when you're in that kind of profession. And working in the mental health field, the adrenaline that you get from working real intense kinds of cases and the stuff that goes on is very well, it's stimulating in some ways, but it's also difficult in other ways. And one of the things I've discovered is I've kind of gotten into photography is that I really look for beautiful things to photograph. And that's become a dominant focus of my life, becoming aware of all the real positive aspects of life. Because sometimes when you're dealing in that profession, you have to deal with difficult things in life, stuff that isn't very nice, that isn't very wonderful. We had to deal with a lot of abuse. That became a dominant theme as time wore on in my work, working with people who had struggled and suffered from some form of abuse over time, and how prevalent that was. It was pretty big. So as I got into photography, I just naturally gravitated towards finding beautiful stuff to photograph. I started out doing landscape work, and then I started doing more portraits with people, and I started going to festivals and events and recording all kinds of stuff. And most of you have seen some of the stuff I do, but I've tried to continue that theme as I go into my this season of life, because it really helps to provide a balance. This last year, for a lot of us, was not a very comfortable year. Let's put it that way. It was pretty stressful in a lot of different ways, both personally and then just all the dynamics around us that we experience. And we're subject to a steady torrent of media that talks about all of the horrible things that seem to be going on in a country that we've really cherished and loved over the years. So I think it's very important for all of us to find ways to balance in that and find the beautiful parts of life that are there. Photography lets me do that. And hopefully as we go over these images today, you'll get a sense for some of that as well. So I'm going to start off with the review. I initially did this on Facebook, actually. I did 2 months. I did January and February. And then I have this ongoing sense of frustration in showing photography on Instagram and Facebook and other social media sites because we have incredible equipment these days, amazing stuff that we're able to do and capture. And yet we're kind of limited in terms of the frame that we're able to show people our work. And most of us are using our phones all the time. And that tends to be the way that we're exhibiting photography these days. I don't think that's the best way to do it. In fact, if you happen to be watching this, I would encourage you to try and watch this video on a television because a lot of TVs, the flat panel TVs these days have YouTube apps connected to it. And the images that I've put up here today have really been converted for a real wide aspect ratio, meaning that your really big screen will show them off a lot better than your phone would. You just don't get the whole experience of seeing the images that you would even on a tablet computer, even on an iPad or a computer screen, something like that. Seeing it on a mobile device is like an iPhone or an Android phone is just kind of limiting in terms of what you can actually take in from that photograph. So if you have an opportunity, watch this video on something like that. And with all that said, we'll go ahead and talk about the work that I was able to do this year in a lot of different settings, a lot of different experiences. I had to start out late in January because I had shoulder surgery in early December and I was healing up for that. So by the time I finally was able to get out and about and out of my sling and hold a camera, I did make it over to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And I brought an anamorphic lens with me because I knew I wanted to do a panorama of the Denver skyline. If you go to that particular building, you can get up like 3 or 4 floors and then look out all over the Denver area. And on a clear day, you can see all the way down to Pikes Peak on the far side, and you can see all the way up to the Flatirons in Boulder. So I took this shot during that experience. And an anamorphic lens is a very wide lens in terms of what it's able to capture. Think of it like what you used to see in the cinema with real widescreen cinema. A lot of those movies were shot on anamorphic lenses. They just get really wide. But I like to use them for wide shots, panoramic shots when I'm out and about. And I've done several before and really grew to like them, so I tried to do that here with this particular one that day. After that shoot, I decided to start getting out in the world again. As recovery from my surgery went really well. And I heard of an orchid show at the Denver Botanic Gardens. If you've ever been to Denver, you know that the Botanic Gardens is one of the most beautiful features of the area. We just love going there. There's all kinds of cool stuff. Every time I think I've seen everything there is to see there, the next time I come back, I see even more. So it's always a great experience. And here at the beginning of February, they had an orchid show. And that's where these images came from. I took a Nikon macro lens with me and captured these images. A little later in the month, then I attended the Professional Photographers of America conference in Dallas. It's called Imaging USA. And I enjoyed it. I haven't been to a large convention like that in many years. So it was a lot of fun to do. I enjoyed chatting with some of the folks there. I saw a lot of folks I see on YouTube all the time. They showed up there too. I captured this image in the lobby. It kind of drew me. I love the colors, and it made my experience there feel kind of cool. It was a pretty nice display that they set up. But I also had heard a lot about birding in South Texas. And I knew that there were a couple of wildlife refuges down there that I wanted to explore. So I cut out of the conference a little early, jumped in the car, and I drove to Corpus Christi. When I was in Corpus, I visited the North Padre Island. I had never seen Padre Island before. And so this particular trip, in terms of where I was situated geographically, North Padre Island was a nice option to explore. And if you've ever been there, it's a national seashore. There's not a lot going on. But I was able to capture these windsurfers while I was there, and that was pretty cool. And then I went up to Aransas Wildlife Refuge. I have long had a desire to photograph whooping cranes and had been told that that's a good location for them. So I made it up there and didn't see one of them. However, I did talk to one of the rangers there at the refuge, and they told me about a location near Lamar, Texas, which wasn't too far away. So the next morning I jumped in the car and drove over there, and sure enough, I saw a lot of whooping cranes. Now, the problem was that I didn't quite have the lens with me that I needed because they were pretty far away. I would say they were maybe 70 yards from my location. And the particular lens I had at that time did not let me really capture them. So I came away from that shoot. I got this nice shot of the laughing gull, but I was frustrated because I'd found them and I wasn't able to photograph them. So next month, I traveled down to Texas again, and this time I had the proper equipment. And once again, I found the whooping cranes, and I got these great shots. I also got some real nice shots of rosette spoonbills. They will come in a little bit later in this presentation at a different location. But I got these there. They were so many of them. I was really surprised to see how many were there, and that was a very cool experience. I also went down to Laguna Atacosa, I think it's pronounced, wildlife refuge near Brownsville, and photographed this green jay. You don't get these in really any other part of the United States because they come up from Central America, they come up from Mexico, and they winter up near this location in South Texas. So it was really cool to grab that image. In March, I was also able to hook up with a fellow named Eric Brown who runs Upside Brown Photography. And we did a photo shoot using Hollywood lighting. And we had a wonderful model to work with. Her name is Betsy. She goes by Strawberry Rave Cake on Instagram. And she's a very cool person. I took a trip to Florida in March as well. I was traveling a lot in March. And while I was down there, I visited the Orlando Wetlands. The Orlando Wetlands is a vast water reclamation area that's used to process wastewater coming from Orlando. It was initially built by folks that were trying to prepare for Disney coming into the Orlando area. And they had to do a lot of infrastructure kind of work. It's a very fertile area because it's water reclamation, and what happens with that is you get a lot of great vegetation and you get a lot of wildlife that comes in because there's lots of vegetation and lots of water, and it's a great habitat for wildlife. So while I was there, I got to experience, again, the rosette spoonbills, and this time I found a nest of them. The younger ones were pretty well grown. They weren't hatchlings or anything like that. But still, I got this shot of 4 of them in this nest. And then I also got this shot of the spoonbill taking off. So that was a very good experience. Finally, at the end of the month, I was able to get down to lower downtown. Sometimes I just like to wander at LoDo here in Denver. There's a ton of street art. Every year they have a big celebration of street art in September. But I like to go down there when the crowds are small, and then I can photograph all this wonderful work that's there. I recently posted a video called 5 Days in Istanbul, a Photographic Journey. I'll put a link in the description, and I'll have a graphic for it at the end of this video. It was one of the more wonderful experiences I've ever had, and I'm not going to go into detail with it here because it's all covered in that video. However, I did have 2 other experiences on the way to Istanbul. When you leave Denver, it's a very easy flight to go to Reykjavik, Iceland. You fly Iceland Air. It's about a 7-hour and 45-minute flight, so it's not terribly taxing on you. You can stay in Iceland overnight and then go to Europe, which most destinations in Europe, or as we see in Istanbul, are pretty close. Maybe a 3 or 4 hour flight altogether. So it's a nice way to break up that trip. If you fly direct from Denver, it can be very grueling and it takes a day or 2 to recover from the whole thing. So this way I thought, I've never been to Iceland. I'd like to experience it. I'd like to at least spend some time in Reykjavik for a couple days. And then I'm going to stop in Germany on the way. And I visited Munich. Spent some time in Munich before I made my way to Istanbul. So that's how these images came together. Here are some street scenes from Reykjavik. And here are some scenes from Munich, most notably the cathedral in Munich, which is called the Frauenkirche, I believe. It was absolutely beautiful. One of the things I like to do as a photographer every now and then is start to rent equipment if I'm getting the idea that maybe I want to add something to my kit, but I'm not certain if I really want to invest money in something. I want to try it first. And so during the summertime, I ended up renting a couple different lenses and one camera to see what that experience would be like. This was the camera. It was the Nikon P1100. The reason I rented it was I had seen a woman down at the wildlife refuge in Texas carrying one around. It's an all-inclusive lens in terms of the range that it can capture. It starts out at 24 millimeters. It goes all the way up to 3,000 millimeters, which is kind of unheard of. There's not many lenses that can do that. One of the other issues with it is that it has a very small sensor. It's like a sensor that has been used in cell phones over the years. So you don't get a lot of detail in the image, but you are able to capture something that's pretty far away. So I decided to try it and see what I could do with it, and that's how I got these shots. I went out to the Rocky Mountain Arsenal Wildlife Refuge, which is very close to where I live here in Colorado, and got this shot of the burrowing owl and a couple of these other birds. And it was okay to use. I had more misses than I'd had hits. I found the ergonomics to be completely unlike anything that I used when I've used Nikon cameras before, and I ended up not liking it, and I think I sent it back early. But I did get these shots, and so I have those. Later in June, I actually took a lens that I had bought, and the reason I bought it, and I will tell you this year in camera circles, we were able to experience this amazing influx of Chinese-made lenses that are optically wonderful. They really do a great job, and they're very inexpensive in comparison to a lens put out by the major camera makers. And I bought a 135 millimeter Viltrox lens and decided to test it out. I took it to the Denver Botanic Gardens where I got these shots. However, it's a big lens and it's bulky, and you can't get too close to somebody when you're doing portraits. You have to stand pretty far back. So I ended up turning around and selling that lens too. In July, I had an opportunity to rent another lens. I rented the Nikon 180 millimeter to 600 millimeter zoom lens, which is a very good lens. Optically, it's pretty good. It's decent. It's a zoom so that you can capture a subject in the field by kind of looking at the whole field first and then zeroing in exactly on where that subject is. And when you're shooting with a fixed focal length lens, that's sometimes not easy to do, especially if you have a long lens. I have a 600 millimeter that I use pretty much standard. And this was an opportunity to experiment with it. And I liked it. I went to the Rocky Mountain Arsenal again and got these pictures of wildlife. It did a very good job optically. So I was pleased. I thought it was a very good lens. It's also not very expensive in comparison to some of the longer telephoto lenses that Nikon sells that in the high end can be absolutely ridiculous in terms of price. However, again, and that's what happens when you rent. You get a chance to decide, is this going to work for me? This was a very big lens, very long, and I kept thinking about what would it be like to travel with this lens, and would I just be limited to using it here in Colorado where I could go on day trips? So I returned this one as well. It was a rental, so there was no skin off my back. I was done with my rental period and sent it back, knowing that it wasn't a lens that I was going to be purchasing. In August, I did it again. I rented the Nikon 800 millimeter lens, which optically is superior to my 600 millimeter by degree, maybe 10% optically better. The images I got from them were really spectacular, including this one of a stray cat that wandered into our backyard. And I also was able to grab some more stuff out at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal. And I, again, really like that lens, but I ran into what would it be like to travel with this lens? And it's very big and it's heavier than any lens that I have. So I decided I'm going to stick with my 600 millimeter PF, which is lighter, smaller, more easy to navigate, does a pretty good job of grabbing images out there, and I'll stay with that. Other photo shoots in August, we had a lot of hummingbirds out at the Botanic Gardens, and that was challenging to grab them, but I was pleased with what I was able to get. I also did another photo shoot with Betsy from Colorado Springs, and I actually drove down there and we photographed in the one of their gardens that they have down there, and that was a lot of fun to do. And I also visited my hometown of Pittsburgh and walked around with a really light lens that I could capture a cityscape. I took this one in the Grand Concourse. It's an old railway station that was repurposed into a restaurant many years ago, and it's in great shape. It's a wonderful location, and it just gives you a great feel when you're there. When September rolled around, my wife and I visited friends in Montana, and we stayed at their house. And this is an anamorphic shot from their backyard looking in. They live in the Bitterroot Valley in Montana, and this shot is from their back porch looking. That's their view every morning, which is a pretty nice view. We also visited Glacier when we were there. And my first experience in Glacier National Park. I had always wanted to go there. And again, I used the anamorphic lens to capture these panoramas in the park. It's a great location. We got lucky, there wasn't a lot of people there, so it was a very nice experience. On our way to Glacier, we visited Nine Pipe Wildlife Refuge, which is on a reservation there, and it was full of wildlife. I got this nice shot of pelicans in flight. I got this red-tailed hawk. It started to rain, but that did not deter these western grebes from fishing. Once we returned from Montana, we took a day trip up to Breckenridge here in Colorado. This year, the fall color was absolutely spectacular. It's the best I've ever seen it. And I was able to capture these images when we went up Boreas Pass, which is just outside of Breckenridge, and it's a great area to really see the whole panorama of fall color in Colorado. And I also got a chance to do another workshop, 2 workshops with Eric Brown. He took a focus of we're going to be real creative in these shoots. And we don't have a particular agenda. We're just going to take a couple props and kind of go from there. And so I worked with these wonderful models, and we got some pretty cool shots. So that was a lot of fun. It really stretches me as a photographer to try different genres and play with the work and keep learning as much as I can. I really enjoyed it a lot. In October, we had a visit from this gorgeous blue jay, and I have to tell you the story here. My wife daily goes out and makes sure that there's seed for the birds out there, and we've attracted a number of different species, and every now and then we get a blue jay. It's not usual, but this particular day we did, and I just happened to have the camera handy, and the blue jay didn't know that I was photographing him. That's another important piece. We also took a trip to Hudson Gardens here in Littleton. Littleton's about 25 minutes away from where we live, and with some folks that I'd met on Threads, and we did a photo shoot with the ducks down there. I had really wanted to capture wood ducks, and we couldn't find any, but we got these other species that I had never seen before, been able to photograph before. So that was pretty cool. This was also the first time I started photographing with the iPhone 17 Pro Max, and I gotta say, Apple's been doing a good job with these cameras. The quality of the imaging is getting better and better and better. I'm using it more and more, and I found an opportunity to do that during this trip. So I'm going to keep using it as I go along here. Talk about light and easy to carry and high quality. It's there. Then later in the month, I did a workshop in New York City. Now, I've been doing these workshops for several years. They're street photography workshops put on by Hugh and Claudia Brownstone. Many of you probably know Hugh Brownstone from his YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the description if you haven't watched his videos. Every year they do Streets of New York twice a year, I believe. And it's a great way to experience the city and do street photography. And I just find there's a vibe to New York City and you feel it as you're walking around with your camera. And I've always enjoyed it. I've also enjoyed meeting new people, which this season of life can be difficult to do. So that's always been a great experience. And I really love seeing those guys and having fun like we always do. This time around, I experimented with shooting with old manual focus lenses. This image of the Empire State Building was captured from the roof of our hotel. I used a Nikon AIS 28mm f2.8 lens, manual focus, old school. I've had it for about 45 years. This particular shot was a fellow that I came up and I saw him, and he was trying to prepare his art exhibit. And it was kind of a drizzly day, so he was trying to keep everything dry, but still trying to set something up. And I said, would you mind if I took your picture? And he said, no, it's fine. Can you wait a little bit until I get set up? And I said, sure. And so I came back about 10 minutes later, and he saw me, and he was still struggling with setting things up, and things were starting to blow around, and he started laughing. And so I took his picture, and this is what we got. And so I was kind of glad to grab that one. This other photo, we went to the Oculus, and I've written about that before on my Substack in terms of how I struggled sometimes with photographing at the Oculus because it's not the most personal environment in New York City. And I decided that what I would do is meet people there and ask them if I could take their photograph with the Oculus as a backdrop. And I met this real nice fellow and got his shot. He's on my Instagram. So that was a nice experience as well. Finally, in November, I did a road trip from Denver to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I love doing road trips. Anybody who knows me knows that I love doing road trips. And I oftentimes do them solo. And it's a great experience. It's always challenging. I've written about that on Substack as well. So you can check out my summation of that road trip. But during that trip, I stayed in Galveston, Texas, and got these shots. Galveston was very interesting. It's one of the more interesting cities in Texas for me, and I really enjoyed being there. It was some place that I would go back to. And on the way out of Galveston, there are a number of wildlife refuges, and I stopped at this particular wildlife refuge. It's called the Jocelyn Nungaray Wildlife Refuge, and that's where I got these images of the wildlife there. And finally, when I got to Fort Lauderdale, my wife flew down and joined me, and we spent a nice week in that area. Probably photographically, the highlight was to go to the Wynwood Arts District. If you've ever been in Miami, you know all about it. It's one of the premier street art exhibits in the country. Everywhere you go, you see street art. It kind of was the first location in the United States where people began to celebrate street art, and that's where we got these photos. Finally, in December, I started working on my Istanbul video, and if you've ever had to crank out a big video like that, you have to go heads down for a couple of weeks to really get it all completed, and that's what I did. So in the course of that, I started playing around a little bit with Photoshop, and I got Nano Bannanaed. For those of you who aren't familiar with Nano Banana, it's an add-on now that's run by Google, and it's an add-on in Photoshop that you can use AI to do various kinds of things. One of the more interesting uses of it is for photo retouching. These images were images from my childhood. I'm showing you the damaged copies of them, and then I'm showing you what Nano Bannanaed did for them. In the past, it would be something like, several days in terms of retouching these to try and get this kind of quality. It literally took Nano Bannanaed about 25 seconds to process each one of these images. And we can all point at them and go, oh, that's AI, that's not real. And that's true. But the fact of the matter is, this gives me at least some kind of enhanced representation of what the original photo was like. And this shot was taken 67 years ago by my father. So I kind of am on the fence about this stuff. I think there are times when it makes a lot of sense. And I would argue this is one of those times. This is one of those occasions. I also think that artificial intelligence is sometimes misnamed. I wish it wasn't labeled AI or artificial intelligence. It's really a matter of automating a lot of processes that we did that back in the day automated a lot of other processes that we did to get the image to where we wanted to be. Now we simply tell the software, do this, as opposed to us going through all the the minute kinds of steps in processing the image. So, that being said, I understand people's concerns about this. I too share similar concerns, but I'm really happy to have these images. They'll go into a family book of photos, and we go from there. Finally, 2025 was the year when we lost a very important member of our family. Those of you who followed me on Facebook probably saw some of the images I put up of Darcie. She was a chocolate lab. We had her for 13 years and 8 months. She lived a very long life with us. She was a daily source of comfort and joy. We miss her terribly, and I just wanted to put up a little tribute here to her because she meant the world to us. And I'm really happy to share these photos with you now. And on that note, I'll close it out. Thank you very much. See you in 2026.